You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 9. During a snowstorm, Lin Chong seeks refuge in the temple of the mountain spirit. Lu Qian sets fire to the fodder depot. One day Lin Chong was taking a stroll when he heard someone behind him calling out, and upon turning round he recognized the man as Li Xiaoer, who used to be a waiter in an inn at the eastern capital. While there, Lin Chong treated him well. Afterwards this waiter stole money belonging to the proprietor of the inn for which he was arrested. But Lin Chong intervened and begged that the boy not be sent to the yamen, and gave money to make up the loss. As the waiter could not stay in the eastern capital, Lin Chong gave him money to go to some other place. It was quite accidental that he met Lin Chong on that day. "Li Xiaoer, what are you doing here?" Li Xiaoer saluted and replied, "After you had assisted me I traveled in many directions without meeting with any assistance and happened to come to Cangzhou, where I met a man named Wang, who was proprietor of an inn here, and he employed me as a waiter. I was very good at preparing food, and made such delicious dishes that the visitors appreciated them, and this led to a successful business. I married the daughter of the proprietor, and when the latter and his wife died I was in sole charge, and opened a restaurant just opposite the barracks. I happened to meet you as I returned from collecting some bills, and wished to inquire what you are doing here." Lin Chong pointed to his face and said, "I incurred the enmity of Marshal Gao Qiu of the Imperial Guard, who plotted against me, and had me tried, branded, and then banished to this place. I have been appointed to look after the Heavenly King's temple, but I cannot say what I may do next. I did not expect to meet you here." Li Xiaoer asked Lin Chong to come and sit down in his home. Upon arrival there the former introduced his wife, who saluted, and expressed her pleasure in meeting her husband's benefactor. Li Xiaoer said, "We have no relatives here, so that for our benefactor to visit us today is just like a gift from heaven." "I am a criminal," said Lin Chong, "and I am afraid that my visit may disgrace you in the eyes of your neighbors." "Don't talk like that, because everybody is aware of your fame. We shall be very pleased to wash and mend your clothes." They all had dinner and wine together, and in the evening Lin Chong went back to the temple. After that he went very often to Li Xiaoer's home, and the latter often sent soup and tea to the temple for him. He however always paid them with money, because these two treated him so well. The time quickly passed in this way until it was winter. Li Xiaoer's wife always washed and repaired Lin Chong's cotton gowns and jackets. One day as Li Xiaoer was preparing a meal, two men entered his restaurant and sat down. One of them was wearing a military uniform, and was accompanied by a soldier. Li Xiaoer asked them whether they wanted any wine, and the officer took out a tael of silver and said, "Put this money in your till, and bring us 3 or 4 bottles of wine. When our guests arrive I do not want you to ask questions, but just bring us fruit, vegetables, and wine." Li Xiaoer asked, "Who will be your guests?" The officer replied, "I must trouble you to go to the jail, and request the superintendent and the head jailer to come here to discuss a matter with me." Li Xiaoer agreed to do this, and went straightway to the jail, and very soon returned with the two men. Upon meeting, the superintendent of the jail said that he was not aware of having met the officer before, and asked for his name. The officer replied that he had a letter which would explain matters, but suggested that they should first have a drink. Li Xiaoer opened the bottles of wine, and placed vegetables, fruit, and wine on the table. The officer poured out the wine, and offered it to the guests, and they then all sat down. Li Xiaoer bustled about as busy as a shuttle in a loom. The soldier who was with the officer asked Li to bring some hot water, so that he could warm the wine himself. But after they had drunk about 10 cups of wine they again summoned Li Xiaoer to bring some more wine. The officer also told him that they would keep the wine warm themselves, and that he need not come again unless summoned, as they had some private business to discuss. Li Xiaoer therefore went to the door, and talked with his wife. He told her that the two men who had just arrived were not quite straightforward. His wife asked what had given him that impression. Li Xiaoer said, "According their pronunciation these men are evidently from the eastern capital, but the superintendent has not met them before. And when I served them with wine I heard the officer mention the name of Marshal Gauchio. I therefore think that their business has something to do with Lin Chong. So I will stand at the door here, and watch them while you go behind the partition, where they sit, and listen to their conversation. His wife said, you had better go to the jail, and tell Lin Chong to come here, and see whether he knows the officer. Li Xiao'er said, you do not know that Lin Chong is very quick-tempered, and he might want to kill the man, or burn the place down. And if it is that officer Lu Qian whom he told us about a few days ago, how could he keep quiet? If there was any row we should be implicated. So you go and listen, and afterwards we will decide what to do. His wife agreed to this, and went off to listen. After a while she returned and said, those 4 men are exchanging confidential whispers, so that I cannot make out what they are talking about. But the officer took a bundle and handed it to the superintendent. That might be some silver or gold. The superintendent then said, I will be responsible for this affair, and see that he is killed. Just then the men called out for more soup. Li Xiao'er hurried forward and supplied fresh soup and rice. While doing this he saw that the superintendent had a letter in his hand. When the bills had been settled the superintendent and the head jailer departed, and the officer and his soldier soon followed suit. Very soon afterwards Lin Chong entered the restaurant and asked Li Xiao'er how business had been during the last few days. Li Xiao'er asked him to sit down as he had a very important matter to speak to him about. He said, just now an officer has arrived from the eastern capital, who does not appear to be straight, and he invited the jail superintendent and head jailer to have wine with him here. While they were here I heard the officer mention the name of Marshal Gao, and that made me suspicious, and I told my wife to listen behind the partition. But they whispered in each other's ears so much that my wife could not hear what they said. But she did hear the superintendent of the jail say that he would be responsible, and would see that the man was killed. The officer also handed a bundle of silver or gold to the jail superintendent and head jailer, and after drinking some more wine they departed. Do you know who the officer is? I suspect and am also afraid that this will result in some trouble for you. Lin Chong asked what the officer's appearance was like. He is a man of short build, has a fair complexion, no mustache, and looks about 30 years of age. The soldier with him is also short of stature, but has a swarthy complexion. Lin Chong upon hearing this was startled. That officer is certainly Lu Qian, and that mean rascal has come here to injure me. But should I meet him I will beat his bones and flesh into pulp. But you must be on your guard against him. Have you not heard that ancient saying, when eating beware of belching, when walking beware of falling? Lin Chong was very angry, went to the street, and bought a dagger which he hid on his person, and searched for that officer in all the streets and alleys. Both Li Xiao'er and his wife were quite alarmed, but that evening nothing happened. But the next morning Lin Chong rose very early, and after washing and cleaning his teeth, took his dagger, and again searched for Lu Qian in all the lanes and alleyways both inside and outside of Congzhou city. All was quiet inside the jail. Lin Chong spoke to Li Xiao'er, nothing has happened today. Li Xiao'er said, my benefactor, we hope that things will remain like this, but you must still be extremely careful. Lin Chong returned to the Heavenly King's temple for the night. During the next 5 days he continued his search for Lu Qian, without success, and his keenness for revenge gradually disappeared. On the 6th day the superintendent summoned Lin Chong to come to the place where the roll of prisoners was generally called, and said to him, you have been here a long time, but we have not promoted you in spite of the influence of Squire Chai Jin. About 5 li outside the eastern gate there is a forage depot for the army. Every month we receive hay and fodder. There is an old soldier there who manages the depot, and you can exchange duties with him, and perhaps make some extra money for yourself. You can go with the head jailer, and take over the new duty. Lin Chong replied that he would go. He then left the prison, and went to Li Xiao'er's place, where he asked them what they thought of the new arrangement. Li Xiao'er said that the new job was much better than looking after the temple, as he could make money. And previously anybody who got that position had to bribe the superintendent. But instead of injuring me, he is giving me a better job. I cannot understand this move. Li Xiaoer said, well, you need not be suspicious, because if there is no trouble it will be very fine. That place is a long way from here, but when I have time I will go and see you. He got some wine, and offered it to Lin Chong. When they separated, Lin Chong went back to the Heavenly King's temple, packed up his bundle, and took his dagger and a long spear. He then took leave of the superintendent and departed with the head jailer for the forge depot. The weather was extremely cold with a clouded sky. A cold wind was blowing from the north and snow was falling heavily. On the way there was no inn where they could stop for a drink of wine, and they soon reached the depot. There was a mud wall running round the enclosure, and a large gate with 2 leaves. Pushing the gate open they saw inside about 8 sheds for beans, etc., many stacks of hay on all sides, and 2 rooms for the caretaker. When they came to the caretaker's rooms they found the old soldier warming his hands at the fire. The head jailer said, the superintendent has sent this man Lin Chong to take over your duties, and you are to perform his duties at the Heavenly King's temple. So you can hand over the place immediately. The old soldier took the keys, and said to Lin Chong, the officials have sealed up the doors of the sheds containing the fodder, but you had better count the number of stacks of hay. After doing this they returned to the living quarters. The old soldier then got his baggage together, and when leaving he said, I will lend you the stove, the rice boiler, the cups and saucers. Lin Chong said he had such things at the Heavenly King's temple, and if he liked he could use them. The old soldier pointed to a gourd on the wall, and said, should you want to buy some wine you can take that to a small village or market about a li from here in an easterly direction. He then departed with the head jailer. Lin Chong put the baggage away, and spread his quilts on the bed. At the back of the room was some firewood and charcoal, so he put some on the stove which was standing close to his bed. Upon lying down and looking at the ceiling he noticed that there were many holes through which the wind was blowing strongly. He soliloquized, I cannot stay here all winter with the roof like that, so when it is fine I will go into the town, and get a bricklayer to come and repair the roof. After a little time he felt cold, so he remembered what the old soldier had told him, and decided to go to the village and buy some wine. He took some silver from his bag, picked up his spear and the gourd for the wine, and put a cover on the fire. He put on his felt cap and locked the doors. Then carrying the keys with him he went along the road towards the east. The snow lay deep on the ground like masses of beautiful white jade, and as there was a strong north wind blowing he walked sideways with his back half to the wind. The snow was falling fast, and he had not gone more than a quarter of a li when he saw an old temple at the side of the road. He entered and bowing his head to the image he said, protect me, O ye gods, and later I will burn paper money for you. He then resumed his journey, and soon came to a number of houses. He saw a bamboo fence with a signboard of a wine shop sticking outside. He entered the wine shop, and the proprietor spoke to him. Where are you from? Do you recognize this gourd? The proprietor said that it belonged to the old soldier at the fodder depot. Lin Chong admitted it. Since you are the keeper of the fodder compound, please take a seat, said the proprietor. And as the weather is very cold, you had better have 3 cups of wine on my account as you are a newcomer. He brought forward a kettle of hot wine, and also cut up a plateful of beef, and requested him to dine. Lin Chong took out some silver, and with it bought his gourd full of wine, and placed the beef away in his breast, and expressed his thanks for their kind treatment. He then left the inn, and faced the strong, cold wind. He saw that the snow was falling more heavily than before. He trudged through the snow, heading into the cold north wind, and hurried to the fodder depot, where he unlocked the door, and entered his miserable quarters. The gods in heaven protect good and just men, and they no doubt saved the life of Lin Chong by this heavy fall of snow, which by its weight had broken down the grass hut where he was going to sleep. When he saw this he wondered what he must do. He was afraid that the stove might ignite the debris, so putting his lance and gourd down on the snow he parted the grass, and looked underneath. Creeping inside he found that the fire had been extinguished by the snow. He then felt around for the bed, and dragged away the cotton quilt. Withdrawing his body from the wreckage, he looked around, and as it was quite dark, and he had no place to make a fire, he wondered what he must do. He remembered, however, that there was the old temple a few hundred yards down the road where he could shelter. So he decided to go and sleep there for the night, and arrange matters the following day. He rolled up the quilt, and carrying the gourd of wine on the lance over his shoulder, he locked the gate again, and left for the temple. Upon entering the temple, he closed the door, and placed a large stone against it. Looking round, he saw an image of the mountain spirit covered with gilt armor, attended by a judge of the afterlife, and a small demon on each side. On one side was a large pile of loose paper, and there was evidently nobody in charge. Placing his spear and the gourd of wine on the heap of paper, he unrolled his quilt, and shaked the snow off his clothes. His felt cap and outer gown were very wet, so he took them off, and placed them on the altar. He then lay down with the quilt covering half his body, and drank the wine, and ate the meat which he had brought with him. While lying there, he heard a sound of crackling outside, so he jumped up, and peeping through a hole in the window, he saw that the fodder depot was all in flames. He went to get his spear with the object of going to put out the fire, when he heard some men outside talking. Hiding behind the door, he found that there were 3 men who were coming to the temple. They pushed at the door, but could not open it on account of the large stone he had placed there. So they stood under the eaves of the temple watching the fire, and one man spoke, "Is not this a good plan?" Another man remarked, "Both of you, the superintendent and the head jailer, certainly arranged the matter very well, and when I get back to the eastern capital, and report it to the Marshal of the Imperial Guard, you two will certainly be promoted. Then drill instructor Zhang will have no ground for further objection to the marriage." Another man said, "Lin Qiong has certainly been caught in our trap this time. Master Gao will soon be cured of his sickness now." Another man said, "A man was sent 4 or 5 times to plead with drill instructor Zhang, and said that his son-in-law Lin Qiong was dead. But Zhang would not agree to let his daughter remarry. As Master Gao only got worse, Marshal Gao Qiu ordered us to do this business, and we did not expect to get it finished so soon." Another man said, "I went inside the fence and lit about 10 stacks of hay on every side, so that he could not get out." Another man said, "It is nearly all burnt down now." Lin Qiong, listening, heard another man say, "Even if Lin Qiong escapes, he will have to answer a serious charge of allowing a big depot full of army fodder to be burnt." The other man said, "Let us go back to the town." A man said, "It will be better if we wait until the fire is out, and then we can go and get 1 or 2 of his bones, and then when we report the matter to Marshal Gao Qiu, and also Master Gao, they will see that we did the work thoroughly." Lin Qiong knew by listening that one of the men was the head jailer, and the others were Lu Qian and Fuan. He thought, "Heaven has had pity on Lin Qiong. If that straw hut had not fallen down, I would certainly have been burnt to death." He then quietly removed the stone from the door, and holding his spear in one hand, he opened the door with his left hand, and shouted out, "Where are you thieves going?" The 3 men wanted to get away at once, but they were so startled that they could not move. Lin Qiong stabbed the head jailer with his spear. Lu Qian called out, "Spare my life," but he was so frightened out of his wits that he could not move either hand or foot. Fuan ran about 10 steps, but Lin Qiong caught him up and stabbed him in the back. He turned round, and saw that Lu Qian had walked away a few steps. He shouted at him, "You villain! Where are you going?" He seized Lu Qian, and threw him on the ground. He then stuck his spear in the ground, and planted his foot on Lu Qian's breast. He then drew his sword, and lay it across Lu Qian's face. He shouted, "You villain! Previously I had no hatred of you, so why did you try to injure me?" An old saying says, "Murder may be excused sometimes, but generally no excuse can be allowed." Lu Qian said, "This was not my affair. I am only carrying out the order of the Marshal of the Imperial Guard, and dared not disobey." Lin Qiong abused him, "You villain! I have been a friend of yours since we were children, and yet you come now to kill me, although you say it is not your business. I will give you a taste of my sword." He opened Lu Qian's dress, and made a big wound in his breast, the blood rushing out in all directions. He then plucked out his heart. Turning his head, he noticed that the head jailer had got up and was getting away. Lin Chong pushed him down and shouted, "You are a vile fellow. I will also give you a taste of my sword." He then cut off his head and stuck it to the end of his spear. He then cut off the heads of Lu Qian and Fuan, and tying the hair in one knot took all 3 heads into the temple and placed them on the altar. He then put on his gown and cap and drank the wine from the gourd. Then picking up his spear he left the temple going east. After walking about a li he came to a village where the men were getting hooks and buckets of water to go and put out the fire. Lin Chong said to them, "You had better hurry up if you are going to put out the fire. I'm going to report the matter to the officials." He then proceeded on his way. The snow was still falling heavily. After walking for about an hour his body was very cold. Looking round he saw that the flames of the fodder depot were now a long way off. Where he had stopped was a dense forest, and among the trees were a number of straw huts covered with heavy snow. Through the cracks gleams of light were streaming. He walked towards the huts, and pushing open the door of one, he saw inside an old farmer, and about 5 farm laborers sitting in a circle round a glaring fire warming their hands. He entered and standing facing the old farmer, he said, "Gentlemen, I salute you. I am employed at the fodder depot belonging to the prison, and as my clothes are wet through I request that you allow me to dry them at your fire." "You can dry them if you like," said the farmer. As Lin Chong was drying his clothes he saw at the side of the fire a jar that was being warmed, and from which came the aroma of wine. So he told them that he had some silver, and wished to buy some of their wine. The farmer said, "We take turns during the night in guarding the rice bin, and we each take a drink of the wine as it is so cold. It is now about 4 a.m., and as there won't be enough for us, how can we let you have some? There is no chance of you getting any. Just sell me only 2 or 3 cups of wine to keep out the cold." The farmer said, "Don't be so greedy." But Lin Chong could not withstand the aroma of the wine, so he said, "There is no other way. I must have some." All the men replied, "We have been kind enough to let you dry your clothes, and now you want to drink our wine. Get off at once, and if you don't go we shall have to tie you up." Upon hearing this Lin Chong became angry, and said that they were very unreasonable. He then took his spear, and putting it under a piece of wood in the fire he flicked the wood into the face of the old farmer, burning his mustache. He then scattered the remains of the fire. The farm laborers jumped up, and the farmer ran outside. Lin Chong thrust about him with his spear, and the laborers ran away, but not before they had been beaten with the spear. Lin Chong soliloquized, "So they have all gone. Now you, sir, can make merry with the wine." Above the bed were 2 ladles, so taking one he poured out half of the wine, and drank it off. Then picking up his spear he left the hut. But he had drunk too much, and staggered about in all directions. After walking a short distance he came to a ravine, where the bitterly cold wind brought him down. It is generally the case that drunken men once fallen cannot get up again, and Lin Chong lay in the snow in his drunken sleep. The farm laborers had got the assistance of more than 20 men, but upon reaching the straw hut they could not find Lin Chong. So they followed his footprints in the snow, and so came to the place where he was lying in the snow with his spear at his side. They tied him up with ropes, and then carried him away to another place. Afterwards, it happened that many thousands of armed boats were arranged in close order in a pool of water surrounded by high reeds, and in the middle of the pool was a fortress occupied by over 100 valiant heroes. Malice harbored deadly dim, chilled to the marrow in the bones. We will now relate what this place was where the farm laborers had brought Lin Chong.